Welcome to the Media Roundtable, Industry Edition, where we dive into the secrets of the craft and provide our perspective on industry topics in service of marketers responsible for the success of their podcast and creator media program. I'm your host, Stu Redwine, Creative Director at Oxford Road. Today, we are joined by our fellow agents of influence, Jillian Garner, Account Manager, Oxford Road.
Thanks for having me, Stu.
You're welcome. And Neil Lucy, EVP, Strategy and Product, Oxford Road.
It's great to be back. Hopefully I don't have as many technical issues this time.
I hope so as well. And Kyle Jelinek, VP of Client Services, Oxford Road. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. I've been in the basement drinking coffee all morning. I'm ready to, let's go.
Let's go. All right, let's break down this week's top industry news stories. First up is Neil Lucy with top multi-channel podcasts. Neil, what's up with that?
This is really pretty cool. PodTrack in the last couple of weeks released a multi-channel podcast ranker. There are multi-channel podcast rankers out there. I want to say that. So PodScribe looks at video, they look at audio. What is unique about the PodTrack ranker is it looks at audio, video, and clips. So you really get kind of a full picture of the distribution of podcasts, which I haven't seen previously, which is comprehensive, and you understand there's certain podcasts that are getting a ton of their audience from clips. So if you're a buyer, you're not incorporating clips in that podcast buy, you're missing potential audience. So it is pretty cool. They're ranking the top 200 podcasts currently. It would be awesome if they could go deeper than that, of course. But 200 is a really good start. So their hope is that they'll become the go-to measurement in fragmented podcast consumption, the world that we're living in now, given audio, video, clips all play a role. It's priced for agencies, but it's not really breaking the bank. I think it's $2,700 a year if you're an agency with multiple clients. So it's not like the biggest expense in the world. And I think the one thing is I think they claim that they're the first multi-channel podcast ranker. So they're not quite the first multi-channel podcast ranker. I think they claim like they're the largest globally. I'm not sure if they're the largest globally. So take some things with a grain of salt. But it's a really cool podcast ranker. And if you haven't seen it, you should take a look at it.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. So Kyle and Jillian, is this the measurement marketers are looking for, or should they look elsewhere?
No, I got a few things. I mean, number one, I don't think anybody in the business has really loved any podcast rankers. I mean, for years, we've seen the shows that we know are the top on one, not necessarily make it to the others. What I really do like about this, though, is that it's not just showing audio only downloads. And this is how podcast discoverability is happening these days, is through the short clips, through TikTok, YouTube. And so the long form isn't the be all end all. And I think that's what they're starting to capture here. And I think that's a little bit revolutionary, which is great. I mean, maybe I'm a little biased, but I think the Orbit ranker is probably best because from my understanding, it's the only one based on actual performance. But look, the more information we can get from various places help us fill in that puzzle. So I'm all for it. I think it's great. It's just another lens that we can look at where these audiences are living.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's another lens, and any additional tool is always useful. And if the price point's nice, so if brands want to look into what's popular themselves, then sure, reach data is always good to cross-reference. But I think what marketers are really looking for is a more precise way to track performance, like you touched on, Kyle, especially because there are way smaller shows with really, really loyal audiences. So I feel like what this specifically is good for is to see a show's growth. Um, Clips can go viral, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean for good. There is that saying of no publicity is bad publicity, but recently and with cancel culture, I have seen virality equal some negativity. So it is interesting to see which shows cross-publish and promote, but I think there's also an expectation that for the most part, all shows do. Like, all shows pretty much have an Instagram and a TikTok and are posting clips. Some of the older podcasts can definitely get away with a lack of social media presence. So I think what this really is good for is how much exposure each podcast is getting with full episodes versus video clips, and then which podcasts are growing month over month. But like you said, I think we're really looking at performance. There's so many other measurement tools for reach.
I want to counter a little bit because
Sure.
what I thought was interesting was that you would have podcasts that are still like in their ranker that are still primarily getting their audience through audio.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, okay, I run an ad in their audio feed, I'm going to get the majority of the audience. But then there are some podcasts, I think, like that are getting the majority of their reach through clips. And so if you're not incorporating clips as part of your consideration set for that podcast, then you're missing a potential opportunity. So I thought that to me is probably the most interesting thing is just to see the distribution by podcast, by video, audio, and clips, and determining, okay, what do I need to do to reach this podcast audience in total? Can I just do it audio only? Do I need to consider audio and video? Do I need to consider clips as well?
That's a great point, Neil. I mean, because I think it shows us where we may, you may be on a show that's ranking very high here, but if you're buying audio only, it's a huge missed opportunity. But in the clips, can we really monetize those?
Yeah.
Which is one of the questions, right?
Well, it's one of the questions, but I think it's something potentially we need to push is how do we as an advertiser become part of those clips?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a good question.
Well, that was a lively discussion. It's funny, the first story was pod track data, and you could substitute one word. The next story is pod scribe data. Kyle, what do you have to tell us about that?
Yeah, everything's going to have pod as the prefix on every topic this week, as every week. But yeah, PodScribe came out with their Q4 performance benchmark report. I mean, look, I love when this thing comes out. I know Neil gets very excited and dives in and pulls out some really interesting things. For me, oftentimes, it's good to validate what we see in the marketplace every single week, day in, day out. So as always, it kind of reiterated some of the stuff that we've talked about for years. Longer ads, guess what, are more efficient than shorter ads, both on episodic and impression level buys. Here's a news flash: ad load negatively affects performance. We knew that. We kind of pioneered that initiative. So this is something that's continuing, which is great to hear. I thought it was great to see like the fluctuation in performance from a geographic perspective, which they typically do, but they're kind of doubling down on that. And then, performance by genre and what types of businesses work and different things are always really great. But I feel like the message of this edition was all about incrementality. Really hitting home on incrementality and showcasing podcast's ability to reach incremental audiences. They showed that podcast, when compared to streaming audio, deliver 28% median purchase incrementality, which is double what we see in streaming. Again, validating what we've known all along. The podcast audience is engaged. They are responding. When they hear their favorite host talk about a product, they're more apt to respond. But the incrementality is really interesting. And what I thought I really liked that they pulled out was some of these niche advertisers that really can't advertise in mass on some traditional medias like cannabis brands, tobacco even, they have a greater share of incrementality on podcasts due to the fact that they can't necessarily reach out on the more quote unquote traditional media types. And then again, also smaller brands. So, I mean, for me, it's like, again, it's reiterating what we've known all along. Podcasts can work for smaller brands, get that D2C going up, and then the more niche you are, potentially podcasts can be a solution for you. I mean, what is everybody else saying in their work?
I think the incrementality is interesting for sure. I don't know if I'm going to get the stats right, but I think for smaller brands, like the average was something like 41% incrementality from podcast advertising. And then when you go up to
Compared to
larger
12% for
brands,
large. Yeah.
yeah, so you get into like the 12, 15, in that range. So here's my media nerdism coming out. When you're a larger brand, you have a larger base of sales. So from just being a brand in the marketplace. So naturally, you're going to have lower incrementality. So it
Of
doesn't
course.
mean that podcast advertising isn't working. It's just that if you're a brand and you start out, oh, I got 40% incrementality 3 years ago. Why am I not getting that today? And it's probably because you have now a base of users, and so it's harder to add new users. It costs more to add new users, so your incrementality is going to be lower. I think one of the more interesting things in the like the media mix modeling world that I saw was a lot of CPG brands are like they're negative ROI because they have such a base of users. Advertising in the short term doesn't actually add that much, but it's the long term, it's the brand, it's like that being available and being known, and being part of the repertoire that pays off in the long term.
Yeah. I was just curious on their note of marijuana and tobacco advertisers delivered the highest podcast incrementality at 61%. I was like, what weed advertisers are out there? I haven't heard any ads myself. So I went in and did some digging, and obviously Zyn, the nicotine pouches, that's been discussed and promoted on Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn. But some of these other ones, it was interesting insight, like something that's not federally legal being promoted across national podcasts. I was like, is that really that much incremental lift? So I was curious. I was going to put it back on you guys and be like, what advertisers have you heard in those spaces? Because personally, I haven't, and I feel like I'm chronically online.
I mean, we used to work with a CBD brand, which
CBD. Yes.
which I think is parallel. And despite the fact that they had federal approval to sell the product, there were networks on the radio side of things, satellite radio, what have you, and even in podcasts that simply said, we're not touching it. And this is a couple years ago. So I think it goes back to kind of what Neil was saying, like the more niche the brand is, the higher the incrementality is going to be. And I think that's exacerbated by the fact where you can't actually advertise some of these brands on some of the platforms.
Yeah.
And podcast is a home for that, but it's not a home everywhere in podcast, even though they do allow it in some.
Yeah, and I wonder how much longer it's a home for podcasts before podcast maybe gets in trouble a little. So, but yeah, I mean, those brands, I have so many investors, so it's not surprising to me. And I have seen it work very dramatically for smaller businesses that I've personally worked with. So yeah, I agree.
There's a Bald Eagle meat company that's been advertising on podcasts a lot recently that I think is going huge. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just look
Bald
into
Eagle
it. I forget the
Meats.
name of it. Yeah.
Podcast is the
thanks for that
place.
tip.
Yeah, thank
You
you.
can get
It's
a promo code.
Yeah, what's the promo code, Kyle?
It's
Yeah, exactly.
Or what is it,
Exactly.
Bald
I
Eagle?
mean,
Blackmarket.com/bald eagle.
Yeah.
Podcast is the place for the freaks. And the next story, Freakonomics, Stephen Dubner on why long-form podcasting isn't dead yet. Jillian, what's your point of view on this?
Yeah, so Stephen Dubner was, he's from the Freakonomics radio show, and he was recently a guest on Mixed Signals. On the episode, they discussed the changes in modern journalism, reporting it, consuming it. Since he previously worked at the New York Times, he talks about his new TV talk show that he's developing called Better in Person, which he's going to shop around once they wrap filming. But one of the most important topics, in my opinion, was their discussion on podcast longevity. Dubner is asked if he has seen a decline in listenership or if he's seen a change in taste for podcasts, since there's that idea going around that people are moving away from long form, reportive, narrative podcasting. And Dubner says that he's definitely seen a drop off in people trying to produce shows just because of how much extra production is needed. It's not really just you and your buddy with a microphone anymore. We have to have 3 cameras set up, and now we have to edit video software and audio software. So said that he's definitely seen a decline in people trying to create shows. There was a huge gold rush, it felt like, before, and there was just a ton of funding coming in during the aggregation wars of podcasting. But Dubner says that he's noticed that financing has fallen off, but his audience hasn't at all. He says that there's still consumption. He's still getting millions of listeners a month. And that consistency is what has given him the freedom to evolve the show and dive into other aspects that are interesting to him. So he says that he doesn't pay much attention to that idea that short form is taking over long form, especially since predictions on what media is going to look like in the next 30 to 40 years has always been wrong. So there's the aspect of we don't know what we don't know, and we won't know until it happens. But he acknowledges that it's difficult for people like us who rely on needing to know. But he's confident that people aren't moving away from long form. Long form is just evolving.
Tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Shopify, DraftKings, Oracle, Warby Parker, Mint Mobile, Quince. I am proud to say that half of the top 10 advertisers in podcasting choose to work with Oxford Road. We are now the world's largest podcast advertising agency, and we do so much more than that. YouTube, radio, streaming. We are on 6 continents working internationally. Reach out to us. We'll tell you about Woven, which is probably the world's largest database of show information that's relevant for brands. Orbit, which is $1.6 billion of aggregated performance data used to de-risk every single campaign. Audiolytics, where we can actually measure ad copy and optimize it to maximize performance. We got a lot going on over here. That's why you can read about us in the Wall Street Journal or the Hollywood Reporter or USA Today or Business Insider. But whatever you need, we try to bring thought leadership that matters to you. Sign up for our newsletter that is called The Influencer. When you go to oxfordroad.com, you can always learn more at the Media Roundtable podcast. We got a lot of interesting content. If you just want to learn about this business, and if you don't care, but you just need somebody to make sure that you're getting outcomes that only we can deliver, go to oxfordroad.com and learn more, and make sure you mention the Media Roundtable, because attribution. That's oxfordroad.com.
Yeah, absolutely. I happened to listen to that entire episode with Stephen Dubner, and I think that he's one of those folks that has developed an audience over the years, and he wasn't talking about extensive audience growth. I think he's got a very solid, stable audience, which is good for him. But my question to Neil and Kyle and is there any performance difference that you've seen between OG shows like his and newer ones, where they have like an established audience and people that are listening, and newer shows? Do you guys see any performance difference?
Okay, so on a new show, typically when you see the major gains in performance, are typically when we're outpacing the growth of the show. When we lock in a baked-in ad, for example, at one rate, and then the show continues to grow. I think once you have a pretty solid baseline like Freakonomics with, a decade
Yeah.
plus of impressions, it does plateau. But if you look at the response rates, you look at the conversion rates, you're not going to see that really vary too much. From a performance marketing standpoint, it comes down to the pricing of the shows, and the more popular they get, they have this kind of established program. Then they start asking for higher and higher rates, and they start weeding out the bald eagle advertisers, and they start going a little bit more blue chip brands. But from an actual performance standpoint, I haven't seen a fall off necessarily, just purely because the show's been on for a long time and working. So yeah. And I will also note that I believe the return of long form podcasts and a focus on that was one of our predictions for 2026.
Yes.
So I'm super glad that Mr. Dubner, is it Dubner or Dubner? Because I've heard both
Good
so
question.
far. I've always said Dubner, but I don't know. Let's see. But anyway, I'm happy to see that he's bringing this and kind of putting an exclamation point on our prediction.
It's going to be interesting to see how podcasts evolve, whether the show has enough money and freedom to self-produce like Dubner has, or if they're going to hand over creative control to a network such as Spotify, Netflix, Amazon in order to grow, because that's why Freakonomics Radio didn't sell to Spotify. He didn't want to compromise any control. He likes to captain his own ship. So a lot of the shows that did sell aren't around anymore because Spotify or Netflix, kind of exactly what you just said, Kyle, had to cut budgets. And if they have to cut, then they're cutting certain shows. So old versus new shows, it'll be interesting to see who will compromise their control to be on larger platforms. But yeah, it just takes so much time and dedication, and you can really feel the difference in a show that was built from the ground up purely out of passion and drive versus a show that came from an influencer's management team and they pitched it to a network. So yeah, I think that we are going to see some maybe, I don't want to say lower quality, but less passion driven shows maybe being weeded out.
That's probably a good point. I mean, the cream rises to the top, and one that I think of often that I'm a fan of myself is Hardcore History by Dan Carlin. And the next bit of the Media Roundtable here is about how history podcasts turn the past into must-listen media. That history podcasts are something that people will listen to for a long time. I know myself, I was listening to the most recent edition of Hardcore History, though, because I'm a Spotify ad-free subscriber. I didn't hear the traditional one ad that he puts at the end of the episode. It's typically for Squarespace, but I'm not sure. I had a note here to check Mania for Subjugation in Magellan, which I did not do. History is one of the genres that folks will listen to. I know myself as well for an extended period of time. How have you all seen history perform for brands?
It's the hardest thing, right? Like, it's the worst responses. It depends, right? And
Okay.
that's really what it comes down to. I haven't seen a dramatic correlation between history per se and performance. Just like I haven't seen super solid genre performance for any particular genre necessarily. It really comes down to how the hosts are interacting with the brand. How is that translating to the ads, and how is the audience responding? And it varies. And this is what we always see. Like, the first thing we do when we get a new podcast advertiser is we have to bring them down to what the truth is. And it's not necessarily the types of shows that you think would work for your brand. When you get a company that's about health and fitness, all they want to buy is health and fitness. Guess what?
Mhm.
People who listen to history podcasts are also into health and fitness. And it really comes down to how connected that host is going to bring your brand to their audience and how they can connect that audience to that message. So I don't know. Jillian, I see you shaking your head, but I mean, that's on
No,
account management. It's the hardest thing to say. Like, yeah, history definitely worked. Let's go.
yeah. Yeah, no, I'm shaking in absolute agreement. It's kind of similar to, I'm thinking, true crime, where it's, it's long form, it's fact based, it's a very loyal audience, and so it wouldn't surprise me if the true crime listeners are evolving into history listeners as well. Um, yeah, like Kyle said, it's so advertiser by advertiser. I've had brands where it works really, really well, and I've had brands where it's crickets. So, if anything, seeing that history podcasts are as popular as they are, it's a good reminder that people aren't actually moving away from depth, and they're just adding short form on top of it.
I was going to add, I mean, I think that the Stephen Dubner, however we want to end up on
This
his
poor guy.
name in the long
Oh,
form,
man.
and the history podcast are linked because they both thrive in like the long form
Hmm.
world, right? Where it's, I mean, the history article is talking like what we learn in school oftentimes is drilled down to like a date or a
Yeah.
quote, and these history podcasts can go deep. They can go really deep on a subject, spend 3-4 hours talking about it. I mean, or there's like niche history where they can just go into a subject matter. Is probably going to be a natural end to that subject matter. I'm like, I looked at the history of like railways in the U.S. and I think there was a podcast that was publishing, but I think it stopped in 2023. So you can go really, really deep into a subject, but if you go deep into one subject area, there's probably going to be a natural end to it. So I thought that was interesting. And from a research perspective, we, for certain audiences, we do see history show up. And as an adjacent podcast, it's like, okay, it's like for B2B advertiser, you may not necessarily think of history. You want to just be in business podcasts, finance podcasts, tech. But those folks have they have interests beyond just business and tech, and history is a really good place. I think probably more so from what I see from a B2B advertiser perspective than kind of like just across the board.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, a lot of times anything that I would like categorize as curiosity seems to work really well when it comes to the B2B audience. And when it comes to B2B, something that comes to mind is Chat GPT. As Chat GPT's growth slows, Kyle, ads look like the next risky move. If you could talk about this story, and I have to say for myself, as I've been using Chat GPT, I have like recently I was doing something in Chat GPT. I think I was looking up a trip for my daughter's senior trip, and it was serving me up like prompts that felt like ads for like, if you want to find out more about, this destination, click here. So what's going on with ChatGPT?
That's the whole thing. And Stu, your segue seminar, I think everybody needs to attend that. There's a master class, right, about how you do the segues. I
Okay.
want to subscribe to that. It's fantastic. Yeah, so ChatGPT, their growth is slowing. Digiday report says that they're pretty much hovering at 572 monthly downloads since September. So it's kind of flatlined. However, Gemini is growing faster. I know Claude's growing massively. And so, they were pretty much the first out there that really got the notoriety. And now there are others coming in. And so what do? Let's monetize this thing. We've got all these users. Now we can sell them ads. And it's not being received well. I mean, frankly, if you're reaching out to chat for an answer on a specific problem, like you're saying, Stu, throwing in the potential for advertising, I think causes people to question the validity of the responses that it's getting. You know, when you tune into a podcast, you expect ads because we've conditioned them. When you Google something, you expect to see sponsored replies, although every once in a while I still get duped. I'm like, oh, this seems great. And I realize I
Right.
clicked on a sponsored link. But how they're going to do it, if they're going to do it, I think is causing a lot of uproar. Redditors always seem to be, first in, and they're basically saying, I'm ready to switch out of chat the second I see an ad. So it's really interesting. I think at the most purest level, it's destroying the neutrality that chat was supposedly bringing us. So I hope they don't add advertising to the platform, but it seems like it might be a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, I think it's happening because, like I said,
You
from
think
the
it's already happening, but it's subversive.
Yeah, no, it was, and it was confusing because, like, I got the answer, and then it was like there was a next level. There was like, oh, you're looking for destinations in Hawaii, and it was like, wait, what's happening? Like,
Well,
I
consider this.
It's like the Google search. Like when you search something on Google and then you get 2 links that are sponsored and then below the sponsored and you're kind of like, okay, well, is that the actual information or did those people just pay Google a lot more for me to click on it first? So I'm hoping that ChatGPT doesn't become that. But it's
it just like it. Can you imagine if back in the day you're like going through the card catalog at the library? And then there's like coupons.
Yeah.
Like going through the Dewey Decimal System. And it's like, hey, have you thought about going to Joe's Pizza Shop? It's like, wait, what's happening? I was looking for Italian.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Before I tell you the Dewey Decimal classification.
Yeah, I just want to know. I just want the answer to my question. Neil, what do you think?
Yeah, let me jump in.
Okay. Nonsense.
Who here didn't think that ChatGPT would eventually take ads?
I didn't think of it. Is the honest truth. I didn't think of it
either. I thought it'd be
I was just like, oh, this is nice. This is free. It's a AI.
I thought it'd be like Wikipedia.
Well, yes, Wikipedia lives on donations. I mean, it's like they saw what Facebook did, they saw what Instagram did, and those are platforms that are giving people free access, and for that free access, the exchange is you get to be exposed by advertising. So the initial reaction is going to be, and it is, like, I'm quitting ChatGPT because of advertising. And the thing that ChatGPT has that maybe Facebook didn't quite have, because maybe MySpace was there for a little bit, is they have real competition. So you can just go, like, ads on ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, Claude. There's other options out there. So the quitting of ChatGPT and just using another GPT is real. I think that there is always going to be ads on ChatGPT. It was just a matter of time, just because they have to find a way to monetize the platform, and they can't really fully monetize the platform just off of business subscriptions or paid subscriptions alone. What I found interesting was their pricing, which, if the reports were right, is like a $60 CPM. I'm not sure, so they're trying to charge, basically, I think I feel like that's what Netflix came out with when they started their ad tier, was like a $50 or $60 CPM. And I think that I don't think there's a lot of science that goes into it. It's like, oh, what did Netflix charge? Oh, they charge $60 CPM. We'll do that. Or what do people pay in prime time for a CPM? Oh, they pay $50 on average. We'll go for that. they're getting a 30-second ad in return for that. And then Netflix, I think, is now in the 30s. So the marketplace has some say in where the pricing will end up. So there will be advertisers who'll be, I want to be the first, I'll pay $60. Eventually, the market will dictate what they can actually get for a CPM for their advertising on a longer term basis.
But at its core, Neil, you're saying the writing's been on the wall. We should have known this was coming. And you're right. You're absolutely right. It reminds me of the old radio station move when sometimes a radio network would sell to another conglomerate and they'd go ad free for the first month to boost their ratings. And then slowly but surely they get the ads back in because you got to make money.
You got to make money.
It's the truth. Advertising. This is why we cannot have nice things. We've got to have the ads, my friends, no matter what it takes. And we are close to time. So I want to thank you all for joining the Media Roundtable. Thank you, Kyle, Jillian, and Neil.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
so
you.
Fun.
Thanks for having us.
By all means. And thank you to our guests for taking part in this important conversation. And thank you for joining the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and creator-based media to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to Oxford Road by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. The Media Roundtable love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mediaroundtable.com. And if you haven't heard about it, Ad Infinitum is Oxford Road's audio creative focused podcast hosted by Stu Redwine, yours truly, Executive Creative Director at Oxford Road. And I suggest you start at episode 1 to get a better understanding of what makes audio ads work and how they can work better. Each episode breaks down real, recent audio ads from top spenders across podcast, radio, streaming, and even SiriusXM. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. And as we say on Ad Infinitum, remember to have fun making the ads work. And thank you to our guests and to Haley, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Rocio, Neil, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.